Derek Santos moved slowly through the dark tunnel, his flashlight cutting through the thick dust that hung in the air like ghosts. The ancient fortress was massive, built into the side of a mountain on a planet that the Galactic Alliance had forgotten centuries ago. Nobody had visited this place in thousands of years. The walls around him were crumbling, covered in symbols that nobody could read anymore. He was here on a simple mission. The Alliance wanted him to explore the ruins and see if anything valuable was hidden inside. Derek had no idea that he was about to find something that would change everything. His suit was covered with fine dust as he walked deeper into the fortress. The air was cold and still. Nothing moved here. Nothing lived here. Derek had been walking for 2 hours when he noticed something strange. The dust on the ground was disturbed. Someone or something had been here before him, but not recently. The footprints were old, worn down by time. He followed them carefully, curious about what they might lead to. The tunnel opened into a large chamber. Derek's flashlight revealed walls covered in strange pictures and writings. He stepped inside slowly, his heart beating faster. The chamber was perfectly preserved, as if time had stopped here thousands of years ago. In the center of the room, arranged carefully on stone tables, were pieces of something that looked like armor. Not the normal kind of armor that soldiers wore. This was different. This was beautiful. Derek moved closer and picked up one of the pieces. It was light, much lighter than it should be. The material felt warm under his fingers, and it seemed to glow slightly with a blue color that came from deep inside. The surface had designs carved into it, and between the designs were small crystal-like structures that sparkled. Derek had studied ancient civilizations for his entire career, but he had never seen anything like this before. This armor was not made from metal. It was not made from anything he could identify. He pulled out his scanner and began taking readings. The device beeped and buzzed as it tried to understand what it was scanning. The results made no sense. The material had properties that should not be possible. It was harder than diamond, but it was also flexible. It could absorb energy, and inside it there was some kind of power source still working after thousands of years. Derek's hands shook slightly as he carefully placed the piece in his collection bag. This was not just old. This was impossibly old, and it was impossibly advanced. Derek spent the next 4 hours exploring the chamber and collecting pieces of armor. There was a breastplate with intricate patterns that seemed to tell a story. There were gauntlets decorated with tiny symbols. There were leg protectors that looked like they had been designed by artists as well as engineers. He also found pieces that seemed to serve no purpose he could understand. They were beautiful, but their function was unclear. At the bottom of one pile, he discovered a flat stone covered with more of the strange symbols. He picked it up carefully and added it to his collection. The journey back to his ship took 3 hours. Derek moved slowly, being careful not to damage any of the precious artifacts. He was tired, but his mind was racing with possibilities. Who had created this armor? What civilization had possessed such advanced knowledge? How long had it been sitting in this chamber, waiting for someone to find it? These questions filled his thoughts as he climbed out of the fortress and made his way across the barren landscape to where his small shuttle was waiting. When Derek arrived at the research ship Pathfinder, he immediately went to the laboratory. His colleague, Dr. Megan Brooks, was there working on some rock samples. She looked up when he entered, and her expression changed when she saw the armor pieces he was carrying. Megan had been a scientist for 20 years, and she thought she had seen everything. But this was something new, something extraordinary. Derek placed the armor on the examination table very carefully. He explained to Megan everything he had found in the chamber. He told her about the strange material, about the symbols, about the stone tablet with the mysterious writing. Megan listened without interrupting, her eyes growing wider with each word. When Derek finished speaking, she just stared at the armor for a long moment. Then she picked up one of the gauntlets and examined it closely. Megan connected the armor to the analysis machine. Data flowed across the computer screens, numbers and graphs that tried to explain what this object was made of. The machine worked for several minutes and then it stopped. Megan looked at the results and frowned. She looked at Derek and then back at the results. She looked confused and amazed at the same time. The armor seemed to have properties that contradicted each other. It was solid, but it seemed to move slightly as if it was alive. It contained energy, but that energy did not decrease over time. It was ancient beyond measure, but it was not decaying. It was as if whatever had created this armor had found a way to stop time itself, at least for this one object. Derek and Megan worked through the night, taking measurements and running tests. As the hours passed, they began to understand that this discovery was more important than they had first thought. This was not just an artifact from an old civilization. This was proof that an advanced civilization had once existed on this planet. A civilization that had possessed technology so advanced that scientists today could barely understand it. By the time the sun rose over the Pathfinder, Derek and Megan had filled 300 pages of notes and measurements. They had taken thousands of photographs and videos. They had recorded the armor's energy signature and tried to understand how it worked. They had discovered that the blue light came from inside the crystals, and that light responded to their touch. When Derek held one piece, the light grew brighter. When Megan held another, the light changed color, becoming slightly purple. Derek sent a message to the Galactic Alliance describing what they had found. He explained that the armor was unlike anything in the Alliance's databases. He requested permission to continue the investigation and to bring in more scientists to help. The response came quickly. The Alliance was very interested in this discovery. They wanted the armor studied. They wanted to understand it. Most importantly, they wanted to know why humans had been the ones to find it. That last question was something Derek could not answer. Not yet. But as he looked at the beautiful, mysterious armor on the examination table, he wondered if there was a reason. He wondered if the armor had been waiting for someone like him. He wondered if this discovery was just the beginning of something much larger. Derek returned to the fortress with a larger team. Megan came with him, along with two new scientists named Jake Morrison and Jennifer Foster. Jake was an engineer who understood how machines worked. Jennifer was an expert in ancient languages and symbols. They descended into the mountain with better equipment this time, including stronger lights and more advanced scanning devices. The chamber where Derek had found the armor was exactly as he had left it. The pieces were still arranged on the stone tables. The walls were still covered with mysterious symbols. But now that he was looking at it again, Derek noticed something he had missed before. The symbols on the walls followed a pattern. They were not random or decorative. They told a story. Jennifer immediately began photographing them and making notes. She worked slowly and carefully, treating each symbol with respect. Jake, meanwhile, began examining the tables and the floor. He wanted to understand how the armor had been displayed. He wanted to know if there was a reason for the way things were arranged. He found that the tables were placed in a specific geometric pattern. Each table held a different type of armor piece. This was not random either. This was intentional. Derek walked toward the back of the chamber, where the shadows were deep and his light did not reach far. As he moved deeper, he discovered something amazing. There was a door. It was carved into the rock, sealed shut, but clearly a door. Around the door frame were more symbols, and below the frame was a carved message in a language that nobody recognized. Jennifer rushed over to examine it. She spent an hour photographing and measuring every symbol. She made notes and sketches. Then she looked at Derek and shook her head. She could not read it. She could not understand it. But that did not mean nobody could. Jennifer suggested that the symbols might be a code or a puzzle. Maybe if they could find more examples of the same writing, they could begin to understand the pattern. Derek realized that the symbols on the walls might be connected to the symbols on the door. Maybe together they made sense. The team spent the next 6 hours copying every symbol from the walls. Jennifer arranged them in different orders, trying to find patterns. Slowly, very slowly, she began to see connections. The symbols repeated. Some appeared more often than others. Some seemed to connect to each other like they were saying something together. The door troubled Derek. What was behind it? Why had the ancient people sealed it shut? Was there more armor? Was there something more important? He wanted to try to open it, but Jennifer advised against it. She said that if they forced the door open, they might damage whatever was inside. She said that the ancients had sealed the door for a reason. Maybe that reason was important. Maybe the door would open for them when they were ready, when they understood enough. The military officers were not happy about The visions continued. Derek experienced centuries of history condensed into moments. He felt the hopes and the fears of millions of people. He understood their struggles. He experienced their triumphs. He learned their music and their art. He understood their mathematics and their science. He received thousands of years of accumulated knowledge directly into his consciousness. It should have been overwhelming. It should have driven him mad. But the armor was protecting him. The armor was guiding the knowledge into his mind in a way that he could understand and accept. And then, when the flood of information began to slow, Derek understood the most important message of all. The message was this: that true strength comes from wisdom. That power without compassion is only destruction. That the greatest leader is not the one who wins the most battles, but the one who prevents wars from starting. That peace requires courage, and that only a civilization that understands these truths is worthy of advanced technology. This message was not spoken in words. It was conveyed through emotion and understanding. It was written in every experience that Derek had received. It was the core truth that the ancient people had learned at great cost. Derek saw visions of the choice that the ancients had made. They had decided not to try to preserve their civilization by becoming stronger. They had decided instead to preserve their knowledge by scattering it across the stars. They had believed that somewhere, somewhen, another species would find their creations and learn from their example. They had created the armor as a kind of time capsule, a message to the future, a warning and a teaching all at once. And in that moment of understanding, Derek felt something else. He felt the presence of Kale standing beside him, no longer as a memory or a vision, but as something real and present. Kale was there to greet him. Kale was there to welcome him to the community of those who had worn the armor. Kale was there to congratulate him on being worthy. Derek could feel Kale's emotion. He could feel gratitude and relief and hope. Gratitude that the message had finally been received. Relief that humans had proven themselves wise enough to understand. Hope for what would come next. When the visions finally faded, Derek stood in the laboratory wearing the complete armor. His body was still, but his mind was vast and full of knowledge. The sensors showed that his brain activity was still elevated, but it was stable. His vital signs were normal. He was alive and well. He was changed, but he was not damaged. Very slowly, Derek raised his hands and looked at them. The armor glowed softly. He could feel it responding to his movements. He could sense the presence within it, the consciousness that the ancient people had woven into every layer and every crystal. He felt connected to something immense and profound. He felt like he was standing at a crossroads between the past and the future. Derek slowly walked to a mirror and looked at himself. He saw a human figure completely enclosed in glowing armor. He saw the blue light pulsing gently like a heartbeat. He saw the design and the symbols that covered every surface. And somehow, looking at it, he understood that the armor was beautiful not because of how it looked, but because of what it represented. It represented the hope of an entire civilization. It represented wisdom bought with suffering. It represented the desire to teach and to prevent others from making the same mistakes. Derek carefully removed the helm. The flow of vision stopped, though the knowledge remained in his mind. He was still Derek, but he was also more than Derek. He carried within him the experiences of Kale and countless others. He carried the wisdom of an ancient civilization. When he looked at the team, he could see the wonder and awe in their faces. They were seeing the first human to wear the complete ancient armor and survive. They were seeing proof that humanity could be trusted with such knowledge and such power. When Derek removed all the armor pieces and placed them carefully on the stand, his hands were still shaking. His eyes were wet with tears. He was overwhelmed by emotion that he could not name. It was a mixture of joy and sorrow and understanding and responsibility. Megan rushed to him and asked if he was all right. Derek nodded slowly. He said he was more than all right. He said he finally understood. He understood why the ancient people had chosen humanity to find their armor. It was because humanity had the potential to learn these lessons. Humanity had the potential to become wise. And humanity was ready to take its place among the stars as not just a powerful species, but as a wise one. Derek spent the next 3 hours trying to explain what he had experienced. He told the team about the visions and the knowledge and the understanding that had come from wearing the complete armor. He told them about the ancient people. He told them about the civilization that had been. He told them about Kyle and the warriors who had worn the armor before him. He told them about the lessons that the ancients had learned at great cost. And he told them about the hope that the ancients had placed in humanity. Jake asked Derek what the armor felt like when he was wearing it. Derek tried to find words. He said it was like his body had become a conduit for something vast and ancient. He said it was like touching the mind of everyone who had ever worn it before. He said it was like receiving a phone call from history itself. He said that the armor did not just protect the body, it protected and enhanced the mind. It allowed the wearer to access knowledge that could not be learned any other way. Jennifer asked Derek about the meaning of the symbols. Derek explained that the symbols were more than just writing. They were a record of choices. They were a record of mistakes and triumphs. They were a kind of DNA of civilization. Each symbol carried multiple meanings. Each symbol connected to others. Together, they told the story of an entire people and everything they had learned. Jennifer listened carefully, taking notes. Understanding that Derek was giving her information that she could spend the rest of her life studying, and still not fully comprehend. Marcus asked Derek if the crystals in the armor had any special properties. Derek explained that the crystals were not just storage devices. They were active participants in the process. They could sense the intention of the wearer. They could adapt to the person wearing the armor. They could strengthen the connection between the ancient knowledge and the modern consciousness. Marcus realized that the crystals were far more sophisticated than anything that modern science had ever created. They represented a level of technology that would take humanity centuries to fully understand. Megan asked Derek what would happen if other people wore the armor. Derek explained that each person would have a unique experience based on their own consciousness and their own needs. The armor would show them what they were ready to understand. The armor would teach them the lessons that they most needed to learn. Megan realized that the armor was not a weapon in the traditional sense. It was a tool for personal and spiritual growth. It was a tool for creating wisdom in those who were worthy of wearing it. Derek told the team that the assignment was not complete. They had recreated the armor, but that was only the beginning. The real work now was to share the knowledge and wisdom that the armor contained with humanity as a whole. The real work was to create a new generation of teachers and leaders who had been touched by the ancient knowledge. The real work was to help humanity become wise enough to take its place among the stars. The Galactic Alliance was informed of the successful completion of the armor. The full report was transmitted through space, traveling at light speed to distant star systems. The report included descriptions of Derek's experience. It included the knowledge that Derek had received. It included the message that the ancients had left behind, and the response from the Alliance came quickly. Humanity was not just being given access to advanced technology. Humanity was being invited to join a greater community of civilizations as an equal member, not because of military power, not because of scientific achievement, but because humanity had demonstrated the wisdom and the character to learn from the lessons of the past and apply them to the future. It was an honor that very few species received. It was a recognition that humanity belonged among the great civilizations of the galaxy. But Derek also understood that this honor came with responsibility. Other species were watching to see what humanity would do with this knowledge. Some species hoped that humans would become wise leaders in the galaxy. Other species feared that humans might become tyrants. Derek knew that the next few years would be critical. The choices that humanity made now would determine the future of the entire species. Derek called a press conference. He stood before cameras and reporters from every major news organization on Earth and throughout human space. He told them about the discovery of the ancient armor. He told them about the journey to understand and recreate it. He told them about the message that the ancients had left behind. He told them that humanity was being invited to join the great community of galactic civilizations. But he also told them that this came with a responsibility. He told them that they had to learn from the mistakes of the past. He told them that they had to choose wisdom over power. He told them that they had to become worthy of the ancient knowledge that had been given to them. The response was mixed. Some people celebrated the achievement. Some people worried about the implications. This realization changed the nature of the project completely. They were not just trying to recreate pieces of equipment. They were trying to restore a method of communication. They were trying to rebuild a bridge between a dead civilization and the present, and the more pieces they recreated, the stronger that bridge would become. The work they were doing was sacred work. It was work that honored the past while building the future. The team worked faster now with new purpose and determination. They reconstructed the leg armor. They built the arm protectors. They created additional gauntlets to match the breastplate. Each piece took weeks to complete. But each piece, when finished, added more to the connection. The ancient armor in the chamber below glowed brighter and brighter. The energy signatures grew stronger and stronger. It was as if the ancient civilization was waking up. It was as if their voices, silent for thousands of years, were beginning to speak again. Marcus Hill spent hours studying how each new piece connected to the others. He discovered that the armor was not just a collection of separate protective items. It was a unified network. Each piece was connected to every other piece through pathways that carried energy and information. When they recreated one piece, they were strengthening the entire network. The ancient people had designed the armor to work as a whole. No single piece was complete by itself. Only when all the pieces worked together would the full power and knowledge be accessible. Jennifer Foster continued her work decoding the symbols. She had filled dozens of notebooks with translations and interpretations. She discovered something remarkable in the symbols. She found a description of what the complete armor could do. The full suit, when worn by someone with the right intentions, would grant access to the entire library of knowledge that the ancient civilization had accumulated. It would allow the wearer to understand the history of the ancients. It would teach them about the principles of leadership and wisdom. It would show them how to use power responsibly. And most importantly, it would create a bond between the wearer and the ancient people, a bond that would persist even after the armor was removed. Derek realized that this was the real assignment. The Galactic Alliance had asked them to recreate ancient armor, but the true purpose was not military. It was educational. It was spiritual. It was a way for humanity to learn from the mistakes and successes of a civilization that had come before them. And by wearing the complete armor, Derek would become a vessel for that knowledge. He would become a teacher for humanity. He would carry the wisdom of the ancients into the future. The burden of this responsibility weighed heavily on his shoulders, but he also felt honored to be chosen for such a task. As the team recreated more pieces, Derek began to wear them one by one. Each piece added new visions and new knowledge. He wore the leg armor and saw battles fought thousands of years ago. He wore the arm protectors and felt the strength and determination of ancient warriors. Each time he put on a new piece, he experienced more of Kale's life. He understood more about the choices that Kale had made. He began to feel connected to this ancient warrior across the gulf of time. Megan monitored Derek carefully during each experience. She watched the sensor readings and made sure that Derek was safe. But she also realized something important. Derek was not just experiencing Kale's memories. Derek was being changed by them. Each time he wore the armor, Derek became a little bit wiser. He understood more about the complexity of power and responsibility. He was being prepared for something. The armor was teaching him. The armor was training him to be worthy of wearing the complete suit. Jake worked tirelessly on the final piece. The helm was the most complex and most important piece of all. It contained more crystals than all the other pieces combined. It required materials that were so rare that the team had to search across 3 different star systems to find them. Materials had to be specially processed in laboratories. Some materials had to be transported through space in special containers that maintained precise temperature and pressure conditions. The helm presented engineering challenges that pushed Jake to his limits. The crystal alignment had to be perfect. Any mistake would mean the entire piece would not work. Jake studied the ancient helm constantly. He measured it. He photographed it from every angle. He tried to understand not just how it was made, but why the ancient people had made it the way they had. He began to see that the helm was not just a protective covering. It was a kind of computer, a biological computer made of crystal and metal and materials that science did not yet have names for. One night, after weeks of work, Jake sat alone in the lab staring at the pieces of the helm that he had completed so far. They were beautiful. They glowed softly. They seemed to hum with subtle energy. But they were not complete. Something was missing. Jake closed his eyes and thought about Kale. He thought about what the ancient warrior might have experienced. He thought about the wisdom that Kale had possessed. And then Jake realized something. The helm needed to be built with love. Not romantic love, but love for the work itself. Love for the people who would wear it. Love for the truth that it would convey. Jake called the team together and told them about his realization. He asked them all to think about why they were doing this work. He asked them to feel the importance of the project. He asked them to work with their hearts as well as their minds. Then they began construction again. And this time something changed. The work went faster. The materials responded better. The crystals aligned more perfectly. It was as if the armor itself was helping them. It was as if the ancients were guiding their hands. After 4 months of work, the helm was finally complete. It was magnificent. It glowed with a soft blue light that seemed to come from deep within. The light pulsed gently like a heartbeat. The entire team gathered in the laboratory to see the finished piece. They stood in silence for a long moment, understanding the significance of what they had accomplished. They had recreated the most important piece of the armor. They had completed the puzzle that had been waiting for thousands of years to be solved. Derek held the helm in his hands, feeling its weight and warmth. He could feel the presence within it, the consciousness that the ancient people had built into it. He could almost hear voices speaking to him, voices of the ancients, voices telling him that he was ready, that humanity was ready, that the time had come to put on the complete armor and receive the full message. Megan suggested that Derek should wait one more day before wearing the complete suit. She said that Derek should prepare himself mentally and emotionally for what was about to happen. Derek agreed. That night he sat alone in his quarters and meditated. He thought about everything he had learned so far. He thought about Kale and the ancient civilization. He thought about the responsibility that he was about to take on. He thought about what it meant to carry the wisdom of an entire civilization within his mind. The next morning, Derek returned to the laboratory. The entire team was there. They had spent the night preparing. They had checked all the sensors one final time. They had organized the armor pieces in the order they would be put on. They had created protocols that would monitor Derek's condition and alert them to any danger. Everything was ready. Derek stood in the center of the laboratory. The ancient pieces of armor were arranged on tables around him. The recreated pieces were arranged in order on a special stand. He looked at each member of the team. He saw the excitement in their eyes. He saw the nervous anticipation. He saw the respect and honor in their expressions. These people believed in him. These people believed in this work. And Derek knew that he had to be worthy of their belief. Derek undressed slowly and carefully. The team attached sensors to his body, hundreds of sensors, monitoring his heart rate, his brain activity, his body temperature, his skin conductance, and dozens of other vital signs. Cables ran from his body to the computer systems that would track every change. Derek stood still, letting the team work. He was at peace. He was ready. Then, piece by piece, they began to help him put on the armor. The ancient gauntlets went on first. Derek felt the familiar warmth. The blue light glowed softly. The leg protectors came next. Then the breastplate, and Derek gasped as the vision started to flow. But he kept breathing deeply. He kept his mind open. He was receiving the knowledge, but he was not being overwhelmed. He had been trained by the previous pieces. He was ready for this. The arm protectors came next. Then the foot coverings. And finally, the moment of truth arrived. The helm, the most powerful piece, the piece that would complete the connection, the piece that would give him access to the full knowledge of the ancient civilization. Derek could feel his heart beating faster. He could feel the anticipation of the entire team. He could feel the presence of Kale standing beside him waiting. Waiting to share everything. Waiting to pass on the complete message. Jennifer placed the helm gently on Derek's head. The moment it settled into place, every screen in the laboratory erupted with data. Every sensor spiked to levels that should not be possible. Red lights flashed. Alarms sounded. Megan shouted commands to the team. But then she looked at Derek's face and saw that he was not in danger. His eyes were open but unfocused. His body was calm. His vital signs despite the sensor readings. Jake and his team spent 2 months collecting the materials they would need. Some of the materials came from the planet below. Others had to be brought from space stations throughout the galaxy. There were elements that were rare and hard to find. There were minerals that only existed on a few planets. There were crystals that had to be grown in special conditions in laboratories. The cost of the project was enormous. The risk was even greater. If they failed, they would have wasted resources and time. But if they succeeded, they would prove that humanity could recreate the technology of the ancients. The construction of the gauntlet took place in a special chamber on the Pathfinder. The entire team watched as Jake and his engineers worked. They had studied the ancient armor so carefully that they knew the construction process in detail. Or at least they thought they did. The first attempt failed. The layers of material did not bond correctly. The crystal structures did not form properly. The result was a piece of armor that was beautiful but useless. It did not glow. It did not respond to touch. It was just dead metal and broken crystal. Jake was disappointed, but he was not discouraged. He analyzed what had gone wrong. He consulted with Megan and the other scientists. He looked again at the ancient armor and the symbols that described how it was made, and he realized that he had missed something important. The symbols did not just describe the materials and the construction. They described the intent. They described the purpose. The ancient people had put thought and will into the creation of the armor. They had believed in what they were building, and that belief was somehow important to the process. The second attempt was different. Before they began construction, the entire team gathered in the chamber. Jake spoke to them about what they were trying to accomplish. He told them about the ancient people who had created the armor. He told them about the message hidden in its design. He told them that they were not just building a piece of equipment. They were honoring the memory of a civilization that was gone but not forgotten. They were continuing a conversation that had begun thousands of years ago, and they were showing the ancients that their message had been received and understood. As Jake and his team worked, something changed. The materials seemed to respond better. The layers bonded more smoothly. The crystals formed with more precision. It was as if acknowledging the deeper purpose of the work had changed something fundamental about how the work proceeded. After 4 weeks of careful construction, a gauntlet took shape. It was not a perfect copy of the ancient armor. It was the human version of that armor. It was built using human understanding, human technology, and human hands, but it honored the ancient design. It followed the ancient principles, and as the final layer was completed, the gauntlet began to glow. The light started as a faint blue deep inside the crystals. Then it grew brighter. The color shifted, becoming more pure and more intense. The entire team held their breath as they watched. The gauntlet was working. It was alive with the same energy that powered the ancient armor. Jake reached out slowly and touched it. The light responded to his touch, growing even brighter. For a moment, Jake's eyes went wide with wonder, and then he smiled. Derek asked Jake what he was experiencing. Jake tried to explain, but there were no words for it. He said it was like touching something alive, like feeling the heartbeat of the ancient civilization that had created the armor. He said he could sense something in the gauntlet. A presence, a consciousness. The ancient people had built more than just protection into their armor. They had built memory. They had built their wisdom and their knowledge into the very structure. And now, through the gauntlet, Jake could feel that wisdom. He could sense that knowledge. He could almost hear the voices of the ancients speaking to him across the gulf of thousands of years. The revelation was profound. The armor was not just a weapon. It was not just a tool. It was a bridge between the past and the future. It was a way for an ancient civilization to communicate with whoever might eventually find their work. The gauntlet that Jake had built contained the same ability. It could communicate. It could share knowledge. It could teach and guide anyone who wore it and was willing to listen. Megan realized that this changed everything they had been trying to do. They were not just studying ancient technology. They were establishing a connection with an ancient people. The reconstruction of the armor was not the end of the process. It was the beginning. Each piece they built would add more to the knowledge and wisdom that could be shared. And eventually, when the entire suit was recreated, whoever wore it would have access to the complete message that the ancients had left behind. The news of the successful gauntlet spread through the Galactic Alliance quickly. There were celebrations. There were also concerns. Some people worried about the power of such technology. Some questioned whether humanity should be trying to recreate something so advanced. There were debates and arguments in the Alliance Council. Some species argued that humans should not be trusted with such technology. Others argued that the armor was not a weapon and could not be misused. The debates went on for days and days, but Derek and his team pressed forward. They knew they were on the right path. They knew that the ancient armor had been waiting for humans specifically, and they knew that humanity was ready to receive the gift that had been left behind so long ago. The successful creation of the gauntlet was proof of this. The proof that human hands and human minds could understand and recreate the technology of the ancients. Jennifer continued working on the symbols, trying to piece together the full message that the ancients had encoded. She discovered that the symbols told a story of a great war that had consumed entire star systems, a story of a civilization that had grown so powerful that it had forgotten why power mattered, a story of loss and sacrifice, and finally, wisdom. The message explained that the ancients had created the armor as a record of what they had learned. They had encoded into it the knowledge that came from their greatest failures and their greatest triumphs, and they had hoped that someday, another civilization would find their creation and learn from what the ancients had learned. The team celebrated the success of the gauntlet, but they also understood that there was much more work to do. The gauntlet was just the beginning. The complete armor consisted of many pieces. There was a breastplate to protect the chest. There were leg protectors. There were arm guards. There were foot coverings. And most importantly, there was the helm, the headpiece that would complete the suit. Each piece would need to be recreated with the same care and attention that had gone into the gauntlet. Derek stood in the laboratory looking at the glowing gauntlet. He could feel the importance of what they were doing. He could understand that this was bigger than science or technology. This was a moment when two civilizations were meeting across time. The past was speaking to the present. The ancient people were teaching new people, and humanity was learning not just how to build advanced weapons, but how to be worthy of such power. The assignment had only just begun. There was still so much more to understand, still so much more armor to recreate, still so many messages to decode. But they were on the path now, and there was no turning back. With the success of the gauntlet, the team moved forward with renewed confidence. They began working on the breastplate. This was more complex than the gauntlet. It was larger. It required more material. It involved more layers. And according to the symbols, it contained more information. The breastplate was the heart of the armor. It would protect the most vital parts of the body, and it would contain the most important knowledge. The reconstruction of the breastplate took 3 months. The process was similar to what had worked with the gauntlet. They studied the ancient piece carefully. They understood the principles behind its design. They collected the materials, and then with intention and respect they began to build. Every member of the team contributed to the work. Jake directed the construction. Marcus checked the crystal alignment. Jennifer made sure they understood the symbolic meaning of each layer. Megan coordinated everything and made sure the work was proceeding correctly. During the construction, something unexpected happened. The ancient armor seemed to respond. The pieces in the laboratory began to glow brighter. The energy signatures increased. It was as if the ancient suit was recognizing what the team was doing. It was as if the ancients were pleased that their message was finally being understood and acted upon. The scientists speculated that the armor was somehow connected, that all the pieces were part of one unified whole, and that recreating one piece helped to activate all the others. This realization excited everyone on the team. It meant that the armor was not just a collection of separate pieces. It was a unified system. When they recreated each piece, they were making the entire suit stronger and more active. The connection between the ancient armor and the recreated pieces was growing. The bridge between past and future was becoming stronger. When the breastplate was completed, Derek asked if he could put it on. Megan warned him that they did not know all the effects it might have. The gauntlet had been safe to touch, but a full breastplate covering his chest might be different. It might affect his heart or his breathing or his mind. Derek returned to the fortress with a larger team. Megan came with him, along with 2 new scientists named Jake Morrison and Jennifer Foster.
Jake was an engineer who understood how machines worked.
Jennifer was an expert in ancient languages and symbols. They descended into the mountain with better equipment this time, including stronger lights and more advanced scanning devices. The chamber where Derek had found the armor was exactly as he had left it. The pieces were still arranged on the stone tables. The walls were still covered with mysterious symbols. But now that he was looking at it again, Derek noticed something he had missed before. The symbols on the walls followed a pattern. They were not random or decorative. They told a story. Jennifer immediately began photographing them and making notes. She worked slowly and carefully, treating each symbol with respect. Jake, meanwhile, began examining the tables and the floor. He wanted to understand how the armor had been displayed. He wanted to know if there was a reason for the way things were arranged. He found that the tables were placed in a specific geometric pattern. Each table held a different type of armor piece. This was not random either. This was intentional. Derek walked toward the back of the chamber where the shadows were deep and his light did not reach far. As he moved deeper, he discovered something amazing. There was a door. It was carved into the rock, sealed shut, but clearly a door. Around the door frame were more symbols, and below the frame was a carved message in a language that nobody recognized. Jennifer rushed over to examine it. She spent an hour photographing and measuring every symbol. She made notes and sketches. Then she looked at Derek and shook her head. She could not read it. She could not understand it, but that did not mean nobody could. Jennifer suggested that the symbols might be a code or a puzzle. Maybe if they could find more examples of the same writing, they could begin to understand the pattern. Derek realized that the symbols on the walls might be connected to the symbols on the door. Maybe together they made sense. The team spent the next 6 hours copying every symbol from the walls. Jennifer arranged them in different orders, trying to find patterns. Slowly, very slowly, she began to see connections. The symbols repeated. Some appeared more often than others. Some seemed to connect to each other like they were saying something together. The door troubled Derek. What was behind it? Why had the ancient people sealed it shut? Was there more armor? Was there something more important? He wanted to try to open it, but Jennifer advised against it. She said that if they forced the door open, they might damage whatever was inside. She said that the ancients had sealed the door for a reason. Maybe that reason was important. Maybe the door would open for them when they were ready, when they understood enough. The military officers wanted to blast the door open. They argued that waiting was a waste of time. They argued that whatever was inside had been waiting for thousands of years and could wait a little longer while they prepared proper procedures. But Megan disagreed. She said that if they forced the door open, they might damage whatever was inside. She said that the ancients had sealed the door for a reason. So they left the door closed and returned to the surface. Back on the Pathfinder, Jennifer worked with the computer system to try to understand the symbols. The artificial intelligence on the ship could recognize patterns in languages, even dead languages. Jennifer fed it all the symbols she had copied, and the computer began to analyze them. After 2 days of work, the computer made a suggestion. The symbols might be connected to a very old human language. Not exactly the same, but similar. It was almost as if the ancient people knew what human language would become, and had left a message that future humans could eventually understand. This was shocking. How could an ancient alien civilization know about human language? How could they have influenced it? Unless the ancient people were not aliens at all. Unless they had come from somewhere else and they had known what humanity would become. Unless they had visited Earth thousands of years ago and left something behind for humans to discover later. These questions filled the minds of everyone on the team. They began to wonder if human history was different from what they had always believed. The Galactic Alliance sent a response to Derek's latest message. They were sending more people. Scientists, engineers, historians, and military experts. They wanted to understand the armor. They wanted to understand the door. They wanted to understand why an ancient civilization had created technology that seemed to respond to human touch. The assignment, they said, was now official. Humanity was being asked to recreate the ancient armor, to understand it, to learn how it was made, and somehow to understand why it had been waiting here for humans to find it. More scientists arrived on the Pathfinder. The laboratory became crowded and busy. Everyone wanted to examine the armor. Everyone had theories about where it came from and what it could do. A scientist named Marcus Hill joined the team. Marcus was an expert in materials and crystals. He spent hours studying the small crystal structures that were embedded in the armor. He discovered that the crystals were not natural. They had been grown in a very specific way. Each crystal was connected to the others through tiny pathways that seemed to carry energy. Jake Morrison worked with the new engineers to begin the process of understanding how the armor was made. They took small samples and analyzed them with machines that could see individual atoms. The results were confusing. The armor seemed to be made of many different materials layered together. Some layers were hard, some layers were flexible, some layers seemed to be made of something that was not quite solid and not quite energy. The scientists argued about what they were seeing. They checked their machines multiple times to make sure they were working correctly. Jennifer Foster worked with the new historians to try to understand the symbols. They fed more and more information into the computer. They showed the computer samples of every dead language that the Galactic Alliance knew about. And slowly, very slowly, the computer began to suggest translations. The symbols seemed to say things like journey, strength, courage, and wisdom. They spoke of battles and losses. They mentioned sacrifice and honor. They talked about choosing the right path even when the path was difficult. These were not the words of engineers or scientists. These were the words of philosophers and poets, an ancient civilization that was also a civilization of artists and thinkers. Derek led an expedition back to the fortress to examine the sealed door more carefully. This time they brought equipment that could scan through solid rock. They discovered that behind the door was a large chamber. Inside that chamber they could see shapes that looked like more armor. But they could also see something else. There were symbols on the walls of that chamber too. And there was something in the center of the room that the scanners could not identify. It was not metal. It was not stone. It was something else entirely. But they could not see it clearly enough to understand what it was. The military officers wanted to blast the door open. They argued that waiting was a waste of time. They argued that whatever was inside had been waiting for thousands of years and could wait a little longer while they prepared proper procedures. But Megan disagreed with this idea. She said that if they forced the door open, they might damage whatever was inside. She said that the ancients had sealed the door for a reason. Maybe that reason was important. Maybe the door would open for them when they were ready, when they understood enough. The military officers were not happy about this, but they followed Megan's advice. Instead of opening the door, the team continued studying the armor they had already found. Jake made an important discovery. The layers of material in the armor were not just different substances. They were designed to work together. Each layer had a purpose. The hard layers protected, the flexible layers allowed movement. The energy layers seemed to store information. The armor was not just protection. It was a storage device. It was a tool for keeping knowledge safe, and that knowledge was somehow encoded into the structure itself. Jennifer made another breakthrough. She discovered that the symbols repeated in patterns that matched mathematical sequences. This was a code, a message written not just in symbols but in numbers. The computer began to decode it. It took hours of processing, but finally the computer produced a translation. The message was long and complex, but the core of it was simple. It was a greeting. It was a message from an ancient civilization to whoever would eventually find their armor. And the message said that the armor had been left as a test to see if a new civilization was ready for the knowledge and power it contained. Derek read the translation over and over. The ancient people knew that someone would find their armor. They had designed it as a way to communicate across time. They had built into it a test that would determine if the people who found it were worthy. The test was not about military strength or technological power. The test was about wisdom. The test was about understanding the value of life. The test was about choosing to do what was right instead of what was easy. Marcus Hill asked an important question. He asked why the ancient people would leave such a thing behind. Why would they create armor with such advanced abilities and then seal it away? Megan thought about. 5 years had passed since Derek first put on the complete ancient armor. 5 years since humanity had received the gift of ancient knowledge. 5 years since everything had changed. The world was different now. People were different. Governments were different. The way humans thought about power and responsibility had been transformed. Derek stood in the observation deck of the research vessel Pathfinder, looking out at the stars. He was no longer just a scientist on a research mission. He was the guardian of the ancient knowledge. He was the first human to wear the complete armor. He was a teacher, a philosopher, and a bridge between civilizations separated by time. His life had taken a path that he could never have imagined when he first descended into that ancient fortress 5 years ago. The school of ancient wisdom had grown beyond anyone's expectations. There were now 3 main campuses, with dozens of satellite locations around the world. Thousands of students had studied there. Hundreds had worn the armor. Each person who wore the armor returned transformed. Each person carried forward the wisdom of the ancients. The graduates of the school were now working in governments and universities and businesses and communities around the world. They were making decisions based on wisdom rather than greed. They were choosing compassion over cruelty. They were building a different kind of civilization. Wars had become less common, not because of military strength, but because leaders who had been touched by the ancient knowledge understood the true cost of war. They understood what Kale had learned thousands of years ago. They understood that the greatest warrior was the one who could prevent conflict rather than win it. Nations that had been enemies began to cooperate. Resources that had been spent on weapons began to be spent on education and health and art and science. But the transformation was not complete. There were still people who resisted the change. There were still those who wanted power without wisdom. There were still conflicts and disagreements. Humanity was not perfect. The ancient knowledge did not make people perfect. It did not eliminate all problems. But it did give people a choice. It did give people the tools to be better. And slowly, generation by generation, humanity was becoming wiser. Derek had received requests from other species across the galaxy. They wanted to know more about the ancient armor. Some wanted to wear it themselves. Some wanted to learn how to recreate it. Some wanted to find other ancient artifacts left behind by the ancients. Derek had to be careful with these requests. He understood that the armor had been left specifically for humanity. He understood that other species would have to find their own paths to wisdom, but he was willing to share some knowledge. He was willing to help other species understand the principles that the armor had taught. The Galactic Alliance had officially recognized humanity as a full member. This came with both privileges and responsibilities. Humans were now allowed to participate in galactic governance. Humans were now invited to join scientific and cultural exchanges with other species. But humans were also held to higher standards. The Alliance expected humans to uphold the wisdom and compassion that they had been taught. The Alliance watched carefully to see if humanity would truly live up to the ideals that the ancient knowledge. Represented Megan Brooks had become the director of the research institute that studied the ancient armor. She had dedicated the last 5 years to understanding every aspect of the technology. She had made discoveries that would keep scientists busy for centuries. She had published papers that had changed how humanity thought about physics and materials science. But more importantly, she had worked to ensure that the armor was preserved and protected. She had created protocols to keep it safe from those who might misuse it. She had made sure that only those with the right intentions could wear it. Jake Morrison had become the chief engineer of the reproduction program. He had trained other engineers to recreate the armor using the knowledge that had been gained. The process was still difficult. It still required rare materials and precise techniques. But now that humanity understood the principles, they could create new pieces. Derek had decided that there should be multiple complete suits of armor. This way, more people could be trained. More people could receive the wisdom of the ancients. But each suit was created carefully, with the same respect and intention that had gone into the first one. Jennifer Foster had become a renowned scholar of ancient languages and symbols. Her work had unlocked much of the ancient knowledge that had been encoded in the armor. She had discovered that the symbols were not just a simple code. They were a sophisticated system of communication that conveyed meaning on multiple levels. Each symbol could be understood in different ways depending on the reader's level of understanding. Jennifer had realized that the armor was teaching her new things every time she examined it. The ancients had woven layers of meaning into their design that would never be fully exhausted. Marcus Hill had become an expert in crystal technology. His research had led to breakthroughs in how crystals could be grown and shaped for specific purposes. He had discovered that the crystals used in the ancient armor could be replicated using modern techniques. His work was opening up new possibilities for technology and communication. He had become one of the most respected material scientists in the galaxy. But he always remembered that his greatest discovery had come from studying technology that was thousands of years old. The relationship between humanity and the Galactic Alliance had become strong and positive. Other species were beginning to look to humans for guidance on ethical and philosophical matters. Humans had become known as the species that honored the wisdom of the past. They had become known as wise and thoughtful. This reputation had earned humanity respect and trust throughout the galaxy. Some older civilizations that had dismissed humanity as primitive were now reconsidering. They were studying the ancient armor. They were trying to understand how humans had become wise so quickly. Derek had been offered many honors and positions. He had been offered leadership roles in the Galactic Alliance. He had been offered positions in governments around the world. But Derek had chosen to remain humble. He had chosen to continue his work as a teacher and a guardian of the ancient knowledge. He believed that this was his true purpose. He believed that his job was not to lead, but to help others learn to lead with wisdom. He believed that his role was to ensure that the message of the ancients was preserved and shared correctly. One day, Derek received a message that changed everything. A deep space probe had discovered another ancient artifact on a planet in a distant star system. The artifact appeared to be similar to the armor, but it was different. It seemed to be designed for a different purpose. The Galactic Alliance wanted Derek to investigate. They wanted to know if there were other gifts left behind by the ancients. They wanted to know if there were other civilizations waiting to receive their own messages from the past. Derek began to understand the true scope of what the ancients had done. They had not just left one gift. They had scattered their knowledge across the galaxy. They had left artifacts and technology and messages for many different species. They had believed that the galaxy's future depended on wisdom being spread among many different civilizations. They had believed that no single species should dominate. They had believed that diversity and cooperation were more important than power and conquest. Derek made the decision to continue exploring. He would search for other artifacts. He would work to ensure that other species received the gifts that had been left for them. He would help build a galaxy where wisdom and compassion were valued more than power and dominance. This was the next chapter of his life's work. This was the next phase of the mission that the ancients had begun thousands of years ago. Before Derek left on his new expedition, he returned to the ancient fortress one final time. He descended into the chamber where the original armor had been found. The ancient pieces were still there, still glowing softly with their blue light. They were no longer alone. Around them were the recreated pieces, the human versions of the armor. They glowed with the same light as the ancient pieces. They pulsed with the same energy. It was as if the ancient armor and the human armor were having a conversation. It was as if they were celebrating together. Derek placed his hands on both sets of armor. He felt the connection between them. He felt the presence of Kale and all the other ancient ones. He felt gratitude flowing across time. He felt satisfaction that the mission had been successful. He felt hope for what would come next. And he made a promise to the ancients. He promised that he would help humanity continue to grow in wisdom. He promised that he would help spread the message of peace and compassion throughout the galaxy. He promised that humanity would be worthy of the gift that had been given to them. Derek removed his hands from the armor and stood in silence for a moment. Then he turned and walked toward the exit. As he climbed the stairs, he looked back one final time at the glowing armor. The blue light followed him up the stairs. The light seemed almost like a farewell. It seemed almost like a blessing. Derek felt that Kale was walking with him. He felt that the ancient warrior was approving of the path that Derek had chosen. When Derek emerged from the fortress and returned,